Welcome to RPG Heroes, a podcast where every other week I speak to a true hero in the realm of role-playing games about their journey, their craft, and their views. As your host, I will focus on one particular aspect of this wonderful hobby for the interview, regale you with stories from my own 25 years of experience with role-playing games, and reflect on the major takeaways from the interview. Join me now on this epic journey and awaken the hero in you. Welcome to episode 14 of RPG Heroes, where we're going to delve into our main topic, improving your game, with the help of the erudite and sharply dressed Professor Dungeonmaster, also known as Dan. He is the host of the Dungeoncraft YouTube channel and a published author. We talk about how he got into D&D, how he improved his game, and some other topics. Before we get into all that goodness, though, let's have a quick chat about the podcast. Well, first of all, good news. We have reached 2,000 downloads, which in my mind is a lot. So thank you very much for all the people who have taken the trouble to click on one or more of my episodes and listen to it. That gives me a wonderful feeling that I'm doing something that people appreciate. And of course, it keeps this show going. Of course, if you want to help to keep the show going even more, you could sign up for my Patreon, which will help me cover the cost of hosting this podcast and possibly improve the audio a bit. In other good news, this weekend I'm joining the good friends of Jack's Con Elias online games convention as a game master. I'm going to be running a game of Cyberpunk 2020. Now, the sign-ups and everything are all closed, so if you really got very excited just there, I'm sorry. The game is filled, but I'm looking forward to this, and of course, in our next episode, I'll let you know how it went. There are still quite a lot of pickup games that you can join, so I'll put a link in the show notes, and if you're really quick when you listen to this, when it actually goes live, you might be able to join a pickup game or two. And in one of my previous episodes, I spoke to the creators of Roanoke RPG, which is a huge online play-by-post mixed with some audio D&D game, which will be played by probably over 150 people. And that's going live pretty soon now. So just to get you excited once again about this whole project and maybe get you to join up, it starts on the 18th of July 2020. So that's pretty soon. Links, of course, are to be found in the show notes. Now, with all that out of the way, let's dive into our topic. So, improving your game. A lot of people seem to think that improving your game is only something for game masters. At least it seems like that when you go online and look for advice. There is tons and tons and tons of advice out there on the internet, both in written form as well as in audio, podcasts obviously, and video for game masters of several different types of games. Sometimes it's kind of system agnostic. Sometimes it's more specific for a particular game, and it's all about running the game, creating cool campaigns, etc., which is great, obviously. It wasn't there when I started running games, that's for sure. But there is a lot less attention, I think, to improving your game as a player. And I think there's a lot for people who just play and don't run the game that they can also improve. So let's focus on both of these things. Starting with the players. There are a lot of simple things that you can do as a player of a role-playing game to improve how you actually do this. And some of these things are simply practice, such as how to get into character or how to actually, roll the dice. Well, I don't really think you need to improve. No, wait, I'm wrong. You can improve how you roll your dice. I hate people who roll their dice off the table. Come on, people. Don't do that. Anyway, as a player, you can definitely improve all sorts of aspects of your game. You can get better at being in character. You can get better at solving puzzles even. You can get better at team play, at making sure you share the limelight as much as possible. you can definitely get a lot better at knowing the rules and speeding up the game, helping your game master out. So one thing that I notice when I look around the table, and I've been running games for a long, long time with all different sorts of people, and of course, with all different levels of experience. And new players are often a little bit intimidated, so they might be a bit quieter in the beginning. And I think it is up to the rest of the table, so all the other players, to make them feel comfortable and also to kind of give them the opportunity to take a bit of the center stage from time to time, if that's what they want. Also to help their fellow players understand the rules, understand how things work, so that it's not all up to the game master. I think that's one aspect that you can really improve. Another thing that I've seen a lot of players do is kind of watch what's going on, and then on their turn, when it happens to be combat, decide what they're going to do. This means that it slows down the game a lot, and my general advice for that one would be think about what you're going to do during other people's turns. Of course, pay attention. Don't just kind of isolate yourself and write stuff down and then go like, what happened? Because, of course, that's not useful either. But thinking about what's going on and then what can I do, and coming up with 2 or 3 options in case something unexpected happens just before your turn really speeds up the game. It makes it more enjoyable for everybody, especially the game master, because it's quite frustrating when it's a player's turn and they look up from their phone saying, what? Oh, is it me? Oh, let me think. Yeah, I find that very frustrating, especially if you're working hard to keep the pace going in your game as a game master, and then players kind of slow it down in that way. If you'd like to become a better player, there are lots of really cool resources out there for you. Not as many as for Game Masters, but there are a few excellent ones out there. A previous guest on the show, the Great Game Master, otherwise known as Guy, he has a YouTube channel which is aimed at improving Game Masters, but he has a whole playlist of videos where he also talks about different issues that players can improve. So definitely go and check that out. Links, obviously, in the show notes. There's also an article which I've read several times and I really, really love, despite the harsh language in there, which is called 11 Ways to be a Better Role Player. It's on lukerobot.co.uk, and it talks a lot about teamwork, being a very actively involved player, and making sure that everybody has the optimal amount of fun. For Game Masters, well, if I really get into detail, I could probably do a 10-hour podcast, but let's not do that. Instead, of course, I can refer back to several episodes that I've already put online of my own podcast, as well as some wonderful videos by, once again, Great GM or Guy on YouTube on how to be a better game master. I mean, his whole channel is about that. Another really good resource that I've come across recently, I mean, it's not that new, but it was new to me, which is a book called The Return of the Lazy Dungeonmaster. And it's by Sly Flourish, as he's known online. Actually, somebody I would love to interview at some point. So if you're listening, Sly Flourish, well, you can expect an invite soon. So you can find this book on DriveThruRPG as well as on its own website. And it is a book that helps you to spend less time prepping really good games. And I really found that very helpful, a really wonderful book. Another book that my current guest of this episode mentions is called XDM, Extreme Dungeon Mastery, by none other than Tracy Hickman, a well-known name in D&D circles. So that's a book I'm definitely looking forward to reading this summer holiday, because yes, I'm a teacher and my holiday just started. So without further ado, let's learn from the master how we can improve our game. Welcome to the show, Dan, or perhaps I should just call you Professor Dungeonmaster from the terrific YouTube channel Dungeoncraft. The professor is no stranger to D&D, having played the game for over 30 years. His work has appeared in 3 issues of the legendary Dungeon magazine, which was a periodical that I was lucky enough to pick up from time to time as a teenager. He has run games at large events such as Gen Con, and he offers great advice on his YouTube channel to players and game masters alike. His channel combines crafting terrain, painting minis, and improving your game in a fun and no-holds-barred way. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Klaus. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. That's great. So my first question to you is, how did you get started in D&D? Because that's been a while, 30 years. Wow.
My first experience with D&D is I was invited on the day after Christmas. The year was 1981. And I was invited on that day because my friend had received Dungeons & Dragons basic set, the 1981 Tom Moldvay edition, and he'd received it as a gift. And we had never played before. He had never played before, but the game was legendary.
Yeah.
Mysterious and legendary. We'd never opened a book. He invited me over to make up a character, and then he lent me the book because he was too lazy to read it. And that is how I first became acquainted with Dungeons & Dragons. And no one taught me how to play the game.
No.
It was my friends wanted to play, but nobody wanted to be the dungeon master.
Yeah.
So
Common problem.
I ended up the dungeon master, and that's how it got started.
Oh, wow. Okay. 1981. Wow. I was 2. That's crazy. Wow. And so how did you manage to run the game? Did you just read? Because at the time there weren't any actual play videos to watch or anything like that. How did you actually do it?
It was a disaster. I remember running the keep on the Borderlands and showing the players the map.
Oh. Because
just from reading the Moldvay basic book, that book was really, it was supposed to be for people who had never played before. Right. But really, most people who played were familiar with miniature war games. I'd never seen a miniature war game. And it wasn't really clear to me on the first couple of readings that the players didn't get to see the map.
Right.
I had to infer that from the examples of play.
Yeah.
And I just worked it out, and we just kept playing and playing. I started buying the TSR modules, so keep on the Borderlands, and I remember the Master of the Desert Nomads and the Lost City, and I just bought them and read them and ran them.
Yeah. Cool.
I have very patient players because I didn't know what I was doing, but they didn't know any better because none of them had ever played before.
Yeah, exactly. There was no, what do they call it? Matt Mercer effect?
Not at all.
No. The very different time, yeah. Because I remember when I started, and it's a bit later, it was the late 90s, but it was the same. There was no example. I mean, the only example that we could see over here, at least, that I remember at the time, was a movie called Monsters and Mazes, but that it didn't really show how you play D&D. It's like whatever somebody in the Satanic Panic thought it was.
It's Tom Hanks in that movie.
It was, yeah, very young Tom Hanks. Yeah,
Tom Hanks.
That was yeah. I remember watching that movie with my parents, and they're like, "Is this what you do?" Yeah. So and now 30 years later, you are Professor Dungeonmaster. So how did you go from just playing and kind of learning the game and playing all these modules to being someone who can offer advice on YouTube, who runs games at Gen Con? Well, sadly not this year, I guess, but and how did you get into Dungeon Magazine?
Well, that's a lot of questions. So let's start with Dungeon Magazine.
Uh-huh.
I've got a good segue. Gen Con to Dungeon Magazine. I read Dungeon Magazine all the time, and my buddy and I decided to we got the writer's guidelines, and we sent a proposal. You had to send a proposal back then through the standard mail. And then we went to Gen Con and we met Barbara Young, the editor. And she did a panel on writing for Dungeon Magazine, what they were looking for. And after the panel was over, my friend and I went over and introduced ourselves. And
Ah,
you said, we have this terrific proposal. You must have it on your desk. And she was very, very kind, and she promised to read it, and she approved the proposal for us
ah,
and asked to see the manuscript. And that was my first publication.
wow.
So I met Barbara Young personally, and she was a very nice person, a very, very good editor.
Wow,
And
that's
the
amazing.
adventure was not that good. The scenario was not that good. In retrospect, it is not my best.
And that's the, is there an elf in the house, right?
Is there an elf in the house? Which we
Yeah.
hated that title. It was a long list of titles, and that's the one they picked. That's when I learned that the editor was ultimately right, because they pay you the money and pay,
Yeah.
and whatever they want, that's what they got. So that's how I got into Dungeon, and then I kept writing for them.
Yeah.
It was very difficult. It was very competitive. It was a bi-monthly magazine.
Yeah.
And they had, after Barbara Young, a series of very tough editors like Wolfgang Bauer, who with Cobalt, I think it's Cobalt Productions or Cobalt Press. He had Dave Gross. They had a whole, and Chris Perkins.
Oh,
Were all the all editors there. But it was very competitive because all of the writers had better ideas than me. It was really tough to come up with a really cool concept that had never been done before.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was tough.
Even back then, huh?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Because they've seen it. They'd seen it all.
Yeah.
It was the next generation after Gygax.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, we want to see something new. We don't want to see orcs or goblins. And it's tough to do that.
Yeah.
So your next question was, how did I get to have a YouTube channel?
Yeah.
So I had no aspiration ever of having a YouTube channel. I'm a very private person. And I watched YouTube, but I had a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, and I had got her sons the basic game because they wanted it.
Yeah.
And they were learning to play, and they always had questions about the game. And they were always, Mom, call Dan up and ask him this. Well, can a dwarf and an elf, can they have intimate relations? And what happens?
What's your answer to that one?
They make a dwelf. They make a dwelf.
Yeah.
So she was always calling me with these questions, and she said, you know a lot about Dungeons and Dragons. You should have a YouTube channel.
Ah.
And I said, I don't know anything about YouTube or cameras. And she says, it's easy. You just use your iPhone. And I thought, it's easy. She's one of those very persuasive, charismatic people. So I said, okay, well, it was the summer. Let me tape some bits on my iPhone.
Yeah.
Well, I quickly ran out of iPhone space.
Yeah.
So I had to transfer the video onto my computer. I had to get a camera.
Yeah.
And then my computer quickly filled up with video. So I had to get an external hard drive.
Right.
And then a separate computer.
Yeah.
And the camera broke, and I had to replace the camera. And then I was several $1,000s into the situation.
Ooh.
And I thought, well, I can't stop now because I've wasted my money.
Wow.
So, and now this is a person, mind you, that knows nothing about YouTube. She doesn't know anything about YouTube. And you have to know so many things to do have a YouTube channel, where you have to know about the video and the audio and iMovie and editing techniques and photographing all these models.
Yeah.
I didn't know any of those things. If I had known what I had to do, I would have never done it.
Yeah.
Because it was it was about a year before anyone ever saw Dungeoncraft. I was making videos for about a year.
Oh, wow.
Because I wanted to get like 10 videos together to launch the channel. And at one point my computer crashed.
Oh, no. Yeah.
It was 4th of July weekend. My computer crashed, and I had to get the material recovered.
Yeah.
And I was just so far into it. I said, I can't turn back now.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And it would have been funnier if I told a story like this. I'm missing one part. she said, well, go research what's out there.
Yeah.
And the first people I found were DM Scotty, right? And I found Runehammer, which was it was called Drunkens and Dragons at the time.
Yeah.
And I watched a couple episodes and I said, I craft things like Scotty. And I said, and there's this guy, he's talking about Dungeons and Dragons. And this guy is drunk.
Yeah.
He can do a show. I should be able to do a show. And what I didn't realize was that that guy's a genius. He's Hanker Infernale.
Yeah.
Over at Runehammer. He can speak just exposit, just right off the top of his head, and he sounds intelligent. And I have to cut my show, I have to do each line, probably about 3 or 4 times. So
under the watchful gaze of Deathbringer.
Yeah. So if I knew how to make a YouTube show, I never would have made a YouTube show. It is really difficult.
Yeah, I remember when I was thinking about creating this podcast, I thought, maybe I should do a YouTube show because, so many people are on YouTube and it looks like fun. And then I thought exactly like you said, I thought about, oh, wait, but that means cameras, video editing. Oh, and I thought, wow, podcasting is so easy when you compare it, because all I have is a microphone on a little microphone stand, and that's it. And I don't have to worry about having a face for radio and all that stuff. So yeah, I have to say, making a podcast is quite a lot simpler. But there are, I think, quite a lot of crossovers in, for instance, how do you get people to actually watch your channel? Because you have a pretty solid kind of group of people that watch every single episode, right? So how do you manage that? How do you get them to watch you and keep them?
Well, I don't know if I'm keeping them. I do have very enthusiastic fans. And the way I've done it is I didn't know anyone in the YouTube community.
No.
I knew no one who knew video editing. I don't know about promotion. I was encouraged by a friend of mine. My friend Steve said that, what you want to do is try to get about 1,000 people in your first year. That would be very good.
Yeah.
And then he said, if you keep with it, the key is keeping with it and making your content regularly.
Yeah.
And there will be a point where it explodes. It's going to go in spurts. And that's exactly what happened. It was a struggle to get to 1,000. Then it was a real struggle to get to, once I had about 5,000, it shot forward to 14,000.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Then I was stuck at 14,000 for months.
Yeah.
Then it shot up to 20,000 and then 30,000. And now it's got about 40,000, and it's kind of slow but steady.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to get more popular than I am, because I don't know what else I could be doing.
No. Well, I think Deathbringer is a really good addition to the show. I love that guy.
And he'll be there. He's making more appearances.
Yeah, great. How do you record his voice? Is it just you and then you slow down the audio, or?
I just put the audio down.
Yeah.
Lower the pitch.
Yeah.
By one octave.
Excellent. Yeah. So you've been writing for Dungeon Magazine. Is there anything that you do currently that you publish or that you are going to publish?
So on my Patreon, I've recently published the beta version of Eldritch, which is a Lovecraftian role-playing game that's rules light, far simpler to play, faster to play than Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah.
I like, but I think it has too many skills. And I also I'm eventually going to publish my own D&D variant, because people are asking for the rules I use.
Yeah.
And a little at a time on Patreon, I just make things available. This is a critical spell failure chart. This is a random city generator that I use. That's an episode that I just wrapped. And I just put it up there on Patreon, and patrons get access at all levels to everything I write. And I put a little something up every week.
Yeah. Wow. And so Eldritch, is it a D20 based game, or is it like Call of Cthulhu D100 or?
It is D20.
Uh-huh.
It's D20. I don't care for percentile dice. I don't
Okay.
think that increments of under 5% are meaningful. And plus, my players are old and they can't see the dice on the table. And I'm always dealing with percentile dice. It's like they grab them and it's like, Joe, you got a D8. That's not a D.
Yeah.
So I like D20 systems because it's immediately accessible. Everyone knows how to play it.
Okay. So it's rules light. It's Lovecraftian horror. Is there anything kind of like a unique selling point to it aside from those things? Like what makes it special? Why should I pick this up?
Well, it's completely compatible with all of the Call of Cthulhu material that exists. It's just much faster. So when I like to play games, I want to play a game that's more cinematic.
Yeah.
Let's call it cinematic, where it's not tied to rules and filled with rules jargon like attacks of opportunity and bonus actions. My players, when they play, they like the story. Now, they like the game element too. They like that rolling the 20-sided die. They especially love rolling natural 20s. And so this is a way that makes, if you don't have to relearn a system.
Yeah. And
there's also, one of the things that make it unique is there's only one statistic, I think. There's physical and mental health.
Yeah.
So you have physical and mental hit points, but there's only one statistic. It's called skill.
Okay.
That's it. It's a one stat role-playing game.
That's pretty cool. I like it. Yeah. Because I find I do play Call of Cthulhu and I enjoy it, but I don't play it often enough to have the majority of the rules like at a moment's notice. And that can be difficult, especially when you're the guy that ends up running the game usually. So I gloss over a lot of things when I run this game. Sorry for those of my players who are listening. They're not getting the full experience. But I find, especially with horror games, is that if you step out of the story to check a rule, or that really kills it. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's about building tension. Annie stopping to look up a rule.
Yeah. Then that's
I don't even like dice that much in a horror game. And one of the things I specifically say in the rules is I have the rule about finding clues. If there is a clue to be found in the room and the players say, I search the fireplace mantle or I search under the bed, they don't make a check to find the clue. They find the clue.
Yeah. Yeah.
That way they're always sure they found all the clues and they don't have to backtrack.
Yeah. Yeah. Or to do the skill dogpiling thing where like, oh, let's all roll for spot hidden. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's a pain. Yeah. All right. And so going all the way back to 30 years ago, you started to play and and what prompted you to improve your game? So what kept making you want to become a better dungeon master or a better player?
So many people, when they get into this hobby, they play intensely for their teenage years or their college years.
Yeah.
And then it sort of dissipates. They find some other hobby, they get a job, they get married, and they leave the hobby.
Yeah.
That never happened for me. I was always fascinated with the storytelling aspect, and I played with some great game masters that really elevated the game experience to something that for me was more than a game, with settings and characters that seemed so real to me, and I wanted to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And it was just my chosen mode of expression and storytelling. And there were always friends around me that had never played the game before that says, oh, I've always heard about that game.
Yeah.
I'd love to play your game. So I would run the game and I never stopped playing. So I just got better.
Yeah. Yeah. You invest time in it and you had good examples also. I think that really helps. I know a few people who, before joining the group that I play with, for instance, had only one previous experience, which was apparently terrible, and yeah, then you don't have a good example. But if you've been in a game where you thought, oh wow, that's how I want to run my game, or at least I want to approach that level, or I want to pick this particular thing that I really liked about it and try and do that myself. That can be a real motivator. And I think that's the upside of all this material that's out there nowadays, all these actual play videos and podcasts where you can kind of sit in on somebody else's game and think, I like this. Hopefully not forgetting though that it is entertainment, because that's the thing. That's what stopped me from trying to do my own actual play. I thought, well, then it's not really just playing the game anymore, right? Because you don't do actual play videos, right?
I don't. I have a few on Patreon where, because people wanted to see my group and what it's like and how I run the game, and right. I tape them, but it's not live play.
No,
and you don't actually see their faces because I don't have the professional equipment for that.
No.
You do hear them, but what was interesting is it's definitely different. So one of the things, for example, I had to tell them to stop using so much profanity.
Oh, yeah.
They tend to use a lot of it. It's a very interesting group. It's mostly women. And they use a lot of colorful metaphors.
Okay.
And also, my group eats constantly.
Yeah.
So you'll hear the crunching of like the Dorito, the chip bag, the plastic, the crinkle. And you can even, because I have the microphone right over the center of the table where we have the miniatures.
Yeah.
You can hear them chewing, like crunching. And I said, okay, well, we have to tape a couple of these combats for Dungeoncraft so I could put it on Patreon.
Yeah.
So there's not going to be any chewing today, and you got to try to not use profanity. And they were cool with it.
Yeah.
But it changes because now they're performers.
Yeah, exactly.
You have an not audience. Playing a game.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big difference.
So they don't want to be in a live stream.
No.
And who knows what could happen in a live stream. So I prefer to just tape it and edit it.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, because some things have happened in live plays that that are still echoing around. I'm not going to mention any names, but yeah. All right. And so you said you use miniatures in your game. Is that something that comes from the older versions of D&D where they actually came from wargaming, or is that something you started to add later on?
I started playing Theater of the Mind. And then in the mid-'80s, they started releasing official Dungeons and Dragons miniatures.
Yeah.
And I got them because when it was my birthday or any of my friends' birthdays, that's what our parents got us.
Yeah.
So we started with the miniatures and painting them very badly. And then we played Theater of the Mind for many years. But then what started happening in the early 90s, we would go to Gen Con, and there was a real renaissance with 3D gaming. Like I remember getting a magnetic board, and you had these magnetic walls you would make the dungeon.
Yeah.
Then they came out with Dwarven Forge, and I was one of the first people to buy it. And it was just wow, that is so cool.
It's really beautiful, yeah.
And so that is, my players just love the figures for the cool factor.
Yeah.
I don't play in horror games. Like I would never play Eldritch with miniatures. I don't like miniatures for Call of Cthulhu. No. But for Dungeons and Dragons, they just love playing with them. Yeah. So that's the game I run.
Yeah. And so aside from the kind of the cool, kind of attractive factor, like what role does terrain and miniatures play in role-playing games, do you think?
The primary one is it eliminates arguments, just practically. Yeah. Because you can see this is where the ogre is. And yes, I can sneak up behind him. Or I should be able to get a bonus to the saving throw versus dragon breath because I'm hiding behind this pillar.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and using the terrain allows players to utilize the terrain to their advantage. They can climb up something or jump off something or jump over something.
Yeah.
And so that to me is the advantage of it. Less arguments over positioning.
Yeah, yeah. Because I used to play a lot of Theater of the Mind as well back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and it was great. And for most things it worked. And we would kind of draw like a tiny little mini map of the dungeon, like from what we heard, like, oh, there's two corridors to the right and one to the left. We kind of keep drawing, and it always ends up kind of messed up. Your hallways hit each other. But for combat, we didn't use maps until, like you say, you get into arguments about, but I thought I was behind him. No, you're in front of him. Oh no, that's not what I intended. And like you say, I think one of the best advantages of terrain is that you can see your characters standing there or sitting there or flying there and think, oh, actually, this rock. Whereas in Theater of the Mind, you'd have to like spend a lot of time describing the whole place with all the details in order for people to be able to do that. So since you're Professor Dungeonmaster, and I now have the luxury of having you in a one-to-one conversation, maybe you can give me some advice on this one. So I'm in the process of ending a long-running campaign. We've been playing for 3.5 years in a game of D&D 3.5, which I think is thematic somehow. So we're going to end this campaign. What advice do you have for any dungeon master out there for creating a satisfying ending to a campaign?
My number one piece of advice with creating a ending to the campaign is you want it to be challenging and epic, but I don't think you want to destroy your world or kill the characters. Because if the campaigns run that long, you can always have reunion games that follow up with those characters.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So I think that it's I think one of the things you want to do is end it in such a way that you could always revisit that world, because if the players played it that long, 2-3 years down the line, if you say to the players, hey, we're going to have a reunion game, they may travel long distances to play those characters because they're beloved characters again.
Yeah. That's good advice. Yeah. Because, end games tend to be very kind of catastrophic or cataclysmic in nature, because it feels epic and, oh yeah, everything goes to, well, let's use colorful language. Who cares? Everything goes to shit, and then it ends. But yeah, you're right. Then you cannot come back. That's very true. Okay, that's really good advice. Thanks. And how would I be able to make it like extra challenging and extra epic? What would be some good ingredients for me to put in there?
Well, hopefully there's a villain that the player characters have run into before.
Yeah.
And it's a confrontation that's more than just a physical confrontation.
Yeah.
So we think of the ending of, I hate to use this as an example, but everyone's seen it, Star Wars.
Yeah.
That final confrontation in Return of the Jedi. And when I say final confrontation, in my world, the rest of the movies never happened.
Okay. Yeah.
There is, what makes that confrontation epic is because there's a relationship between the protagonist and the antagonist.
Yeah.
So there's that. You want to, hopefully you built an emotional, there's something about that connection between the heroes and the villains, that it's an emotional connection. And my other advice is set it on something high. Have the final fight on something high, because having fights on things that are high where you could drop off into a bottomless pit That's always exciting. That's why so many movies do it.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, I like it. Yeah. So my players listen to this show, so I cannot give away too much, but they'll be in for a few surprises, that's for sure. And location is one of the things that I had in mind, that I really wanted to make it something special, where environment really starts to matter in the final fight. Yeah, excellent.
And time. Before I forget, time is important. There should use a timer.
Yeah.
If the time runs out, the players lose.
Yeah.
Every great suspense film's got a ticking bomb in it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Excellent. My players are going to hate me now. Well, in a way, when it's going on, they were like, "Oh no, you're terrible," and then afterwards they're like, "Oh, that was actually really cool." At least I hope that's the outcome anyway. So far, they seem to like the game, so we'll see. Excellent. Well, thanks. This is such a luxury for me. I was actually just before I went up to do this interview, I was sitting on the sofa with my wife, and she said, why do you do this? Like, obviously she's fine with it, but she was just wondering, like, why do you make a podcast? It doesn't make you any money. I said, no, that's for sure. But why do you do it? I said, well, one of the things is it's such a great luxury to reach out all the way through YouTube and talk to the guy that I admire for all his videos, and get his advice on something, or just have a chat. I said, yeah, for me, that's one of the reasons to do it anyway. Yeah. All right, great. Hey, so I have one particular question that I ask every one of my RPG heroes, and that is, who is your RPG hero and why?
My RPG hero is Tracy Hickman, who wrote Dragonlance, both the modules and the novels, and Ravenloft, and he designed so much else. There was a Top Secret SI. He was big into that. He actually designed, I forget what it was called. There was an adventure set on a submarine, a nuclear submarine.
Oh.
And it contained actual submarine authentic blueprints.
Wow.
He had actually done the research and been on a submarine. And his games and his style of game mastering has really changed my life. And not only did he really changed the direction. You can pinpoint where Dungeons and Dragons changed. So there is the Gygax style, which against the giants and drow and Queen of the Demon Web Pits. And those were the first modules in the 70s and early 80s. And they were pretty much about defeating a villain. But Ravenloft took a location, tied the villain to the location, and weaved in a story.
Yeah.
And it was a story where you used playing cards to tell the player's fortunes, but also the villain's goals were malleable. They were different every time you ran the adventure, what he wanted to accomplish. And there was a backstory where you find out, yes, he's the villain, but there's a tragic love story involved. And he has this tragic background. So on a certain level, you feel sorry for Strahd. Then with the Dragonlance modules, if you read them, they have a definite arc. There are 3 or 4 modules for each novel. I think 12 modules total. And they give advice on how to run a story. Like, what happens if one of the main characters, dies in the 3rd module? What do you do?
Yeah.
And it has advice on how to do that. And one of the pieces of advice being something like, if you have to kill one of these characters, try to make them get killed by falling off something high into a river or over a waterfall or something.
Oh, yeah.
They can always come back. And it was really about the story. And then when I played with Tracy Hickman, I played one of his famous killer breakfasts. He would do this at Gen Con every year, Tracy Hickman's Killer Breakfast, where you would play a first-level character against 18th level monsters, 20th level, like dragons, and they would time you with a stopwatch how long you could live. And And when you died, someone else would come up with their first level character on the stage. And he had this great improvisational style that was so engaging. And when I played with him, one of the first question I asked him, because I was up first, this was like 7 a.m. in the morning, and I wanted to be the first one there. And I said, what edition are we using? Are we using the new second edition? Because it was brand new. And he says, edition? We don't need no stinking second edition. And that's where I had many conversations with him since then and attended many seminars. And then he told me the secret, which is that real game designers, they don't actually play with the rules that they design.
Yeah.
They do it more. Yeah, they just do it more freeform.
Yeah.
And improvisational, and the basics are there.
Yeah.
But it boils down to, okay, say versus Dragon Breath, you need a 14. And nobody looks up anything. Yeah. And he's since written XDM, Extreme Dungeon Mastery, which if you can get your hands on Tracy Hickman's XDM, Extreme Dungeon Mastery, it reveals many of the secrets to role-playing games, which is that there's only so many results you can have on a 20-sided die.
Yeah. That
you could really reduce any role-playing game to about anywhere from 1 to 3 statistics.
Yeah.
And run any genre. Like, the system really doesn't matter.
No.
Many people, they can't see past that, and they love buying systems.
Yeah.
And I have a ton of them behind me. I'm always reading them, and that's what sells the best. But you really don't need them.
No.
So that's why he's my role-playing hero.
Wow. That's a great answer. Yeah, really detailed also. I like that a lot. And I'm going to see if I can find that book. That'd be very interesting to read. I guess it's probably still on Amazon or something like that.
It is, yep.
Oh, cool. Yeah, we recently got Amazon here in my tiny country of the Netherlands. I used to have to get stuff from Amazon Germany, which is fine. But then, there's shipping. Excellent. Cool. I'll definitely link to that book in the show notes as well. And that sadly brings us already to the end of this interview. Thanks super much, Dan, for being on the show. And I look forward to the next videos on your channel.
Klaus, thanks so much for having me. It really was a pleasure.
Well, that was a wonderful and very educational talk with the professor. And, one thing that I take away from this is that this summer I will be reading XDM, or Extreme Dungeon Mastery, by Tracy Hickman. Another thing that I really liked in this interview is that it's all about the story. And if you can get a good relationship going between your villain and your player characters, your game will benefit from it greatly. And I talked to the professor about ending my own campaign, and he said, well, if you want an epic ending to your campaign, you should set the scene somewhere very high, where people can fall to their death. But just like in a good old TV show or movie, they fall out of sight. So there is an opportunity for them to end up actually hanging on by one finger and climbing back up right at the most important moment. Great advice also about creating tension in your game by mostly using time. Setting a timer on anything creates tension in a game, and that is one very simple and very effective way to improve your game. And when we talk about publishing, once again we see that if you want to get published, what is most important, aside from writing skills, etc., is talking to people to increase your network. And I think in general, not just from the interview, but also just to close off the topic of improving your game, just like anything else, role-playing is something that you get better at by doing it a lot. So make sure you play plenty of games and run games as much as possible. Try different types of games, different systems, etc., to kind of hone different particular skills that fit those games, and consume a useful amount of media. So, for instance, if you're going to be running or playing in a science fiction game, watch a bit of science fiction, read some science fiction, get the lingo going in your head, and get the imagery going so that you can have a more interesting and more immersive experience. Try and get into convention games. This is something I've just started to do. So I'll be running a game at the good friends of Jack's Con Elias. I'll be also playing a game. Very lucky that I got into a game with Matt Sanderson. And I will be playing, hopefully, at the online version of Gen Con. And later in October at Albacon, which is the topic of the next episode, actually. So, without further ado, let's wrap up here and get these intentions turned into actions. Let's play lots and lots of role-playing games. Well, that's it for episode 14. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed recording. If you did, please consider leaving a 5-star review on iTunes. It really helps to get the podcast get heard. Want to keep up with the latest news about my podcast? Then hop on over to Twitter at RPGHeroes1. Check out the full show notes with all the links at rpgheroes.buzzsprout.com. Want to support the show and join other supporters on my Discord channel? Then I would be honored if you check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/rpgheroes. You can also buy RPG products with my affiliate code. Check the show notes. 2 weeks from now, I'll be talking to Mark Palmer of Albacon about online conventions. Until next time, stay heroic.